The clock had just passed midnight when the soft rain began to fall over the small town of Maplewood. Through the window of a quiet apartment on Cedar Lane, a warm yellow light glowed against the grey night. Inside, Emma Clark sat curled up on her sofa, a half-empty cup of tea resting on the table beside her. The world around her was silent, the kind of silence that feels almost alive, filled with thoughts you never say aloud. Emma wasn't used to late nights anymore. For years, her life had followed the same calm rhythm. Work, dinner alone, a few pages of a book and sleep. People who met her would describe her as gentle, kind, steady, the kind of woman who always listened more than she spoke. But beneath that calm exterior lived a quiet ache. Not sadness exactly, but something softer. Something like longing. Her apartment was filled with little traces of the life she had built. Photos of her friends, books arranged by color, and a vase of fresh daisies she bought every Sunday. To anyone else, it would seem peaceful. Yet every night, when the city lights dimmed and the sound of distant cars faded, Emma felt the weight of a thought she never dared to share. That somewhere, somehow, a part of her life had paused years ago and never truly resumed. She glanced at the clock. 12:07 a.m. The rain was tapping gently on the glass, like a melody she almost recognized. She pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders and looked at her phone, sitting quietly on the arm of the couch. No new messages. No calls. Still, she hesitated before setting it down again, almost as if she expected it to ring. It had been years since she'd last heard from Nathan Cole. They had met in college, two people drawn together by laughter, curiosity, and a sense of being understood without explanation. Back then, life had felt wide open. There were long walks by the river, shared dreams of cities they'd one day see, and promises they both believed would last forever. But time had moved forward, and they hadn't. Sometimes she wondered if he ever thought of her. Other times she convinced herself he didn't. After all, people change, memories fade, and the past quietly tucks itself into corners you rarely visit. But on nights like this, when the world felt softer, slower, she could almost hear his voice. Like a memory she couldn't quite turn off. Emma stood and moved to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass. The rain was steady now, drumming softly over the rooftops. Down below, the street lamps reflected in shallow puddles, turning the road into a ribbon of gold. It reminded her of something Nathan once said during one of their late-night talks. The best moments in life are the quiet ones, the ones nobody writes about. She smiled faintly, remembering how he used to say things that sounded simple, that stayed with her for years. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the quiet. The vibration startled her, not because she wasn't expecting it, but because she had just been thinking of him. She froze, her eyes fixed on the screen as it lit up with a single name. Nathan. For a moment she didn't move. The years between them seemed to collapse into that 1 second. The sound of his laughter, the warmth of old memories, and the question she'd never dared to ask herself. What if some connections never really fade? Her heart beat faster as she reached for the phone, her fingers trembling slightly. Hello? There was a soft pause, and then his voice, familiar yet older, quieter, filled the silence. Emma, I hope it's not too late. I just needed to hear your voice. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain whispered in the background, and Emma felt a rush of emotions she couldn't name. Surprise, nostalgia, maybe even fear. She finally said, It's been a long time. I know, Nathan replied, his voice low. I wasn't sure if I should call. But tonight, something told me I needed to. The sound of his voice carried a weight she hadn't expected. There was something behind it. Not sadness, but sincerity. The kind that only comes when words have been waiting too long to be spoken. As they exchanged quiet words, the minutes drifted by unnoticed. The conversation wasn't about the past or the reasons they drifted apart. It was about small things. How life had changed. What they missed. What they still hoped for. Yet, beneath each sentence lingered a question neither dared to ask. Why now? When the clock struck 1, the rain had softened to a mist. Nathan hesitated before saying, "There's something I've wanted to tell you. Emma, something I should have said years ago." Her breath caught slightly, but she said nothing. "I'll tell you next time," he added after a pause, his voice almost breaking into a smile. "For tonight, I just wanted to hear you." As the call ended, Emma sat quietly in the dim light. The air around her felt changed, not heavier but warmer, as if some invisible thread had been gently tugged back to life. She looked out the window once more. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, and in the faint reflection of the glass, she saw herself smiling, just a little, at a feeling she couldn't quite name. For the first time in a long while, Emma didn't feel alone. The morning after Nathan's call, Emma moved through her apartment as though everything looked the same. Yet somehow, it didn't feel that way anymore. The familiar scent of coffee, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the sunlight filtering through the curtains, all of it seemed touched by something soft and unfamiliar. She replayed his voice in her mind. Calm, thoughtful, hesitant. "There's something I should have said years ago." Those words lingered like a melody she couldn't forget. As she sipped her coffee, her mind drifted backward, to a time when she and Nathan were young, before life became complicated, before the silence that years later stretched between them. They met on an early autumn morning during their first semester of college. She remembered how the air had carried that crisp scent of leaves and new beginnings. Emma had been sitting alone on a bench near the library, sketching the old brick building across the courtyard. Her sketchbook was her quiet escape from the world, a place where she could collect moments without having to explain them. "Is that supposed to be the library?" a voice had asked. She had looked up to see a tall boy with curious eyes and an uncertain smile standing in front of her. He held 2 steaming cups of coffee and a book tucked under his arm. "It was supposed to be," she said, smiling slightly. "But it seems I've given it one too many windows." He laughed, a soft, genuine laugh that didn't feel like it belonged to a stranger. "I think it looks better your way," he said, handing her one of the cups. "I bought 2, but I don't even like coffee that much." It was the kind of moment that shouldn't have meant much, yet it did. That first conversation lasted hours. They talked about everything and nothing. Music, family, the places they wanted to see someday. Nathan had a way of listening that made her feel seen, as though her thoughts actually mattered. And just like that, a quiet friendship began. Over the months that followed, their bond grew in small, unplanned ways, shared notes in class, long walks across campus, evenings spent watching the city lights from the old bridge. Emma used to tell herself it was just friendship, but sometimes, when their laughter faded into silence, and their eyes met for a moment too long, she felt something deeper stirring, something she couldn't quite name. Nathan never said anything either, though there were moments when it seemed he might. Once, after a long study session at the library, they walked home together in the first snowfall of winter. The streets were hushed, the world wrapped in white. "I like the way snow makes everything quiet," Emma said. "Me too," Nathan replied, brushing the snow from his hair. "It feels like the world pauses, just for a moment." They stood there, under the streetlight, snowflakes drifting between them. It wasn't a grand or dramatic moment, just two people sharing silence, feeling something too fragile to name. Years later, when Emma thought back on those days, she realized how rare that kind of simplicity was. Life had been kinder then, slower, more forgiving. But time has its own rhythm, and it never waits for those still learning how to hold on. Graduation came. Nathan was offered a job in another state. Emma had a position waiting for her in the city. They promised to stay in touch, and for a while they did. Calls, letters, the occasional visit. But slowly, the messages became shorter, the silences longer, until one day, there was no message at all. It wasn't anyone's fault. Not really. It was just life moving forward, quietly and without permission. As Emma looked back now, she realized how deeply those years had shaped her. Nathan had been the one person who saw her not as quiet or reserved, but as thoughtful, capable, alive. He had been the first to notice when she was sad, the first to understand when she didn't have words. And now, all these years later, his voice had returned like an echo from that past, gentle, familiar, unfinished. That night, Emma sat by her window again, the same spot where she'd taken his call. Outside, the moonlight brushed softly over the rooftops. The world was calm, but inside her heart, the past was quietly awake. She wondered if he remembered the same moments she did. The laughter, the bridge, the first snow. She wondered if he too had ever paused during an ordinary day and thought of her. Without knowing why. As the night deepened, she whispered to herself, maybe some connections never fade. They just wait until we're ready to hear them again. And though she didn't know what Nathan's confession might be, Emma felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. It wasn't the loud, youthful kind she once knew. It was quieter now, steadier, like the slow rhythm of rain after a storm. In that gentle stillness, Emma smiled faintly, realizing that sometimes the heart remembers what the mind has long tried to forget. The past hadn't truly left her. It had simply been waiting for the right midnight to return. A week had passed since Nathan's midnight call, yet Emma still found herself thinking about it more often than she meant to. The sound of his voice lingered in her mind like the final note of a song, calm but impossible to forget. She had told herself not to read too much into it. People drift apart and sometimes reconnect just to close an old chapter. Maybe that was all this was. But late at night, when the world grew quiet, she caught herself wondering what he had wanted to say, the truth he promised to share next time. The next time came sooner than she expected. That Friday, Emma stopped by the small cafe near her office, a place she often visited for its quiet corner tables and warm cinnamon aroma. She ordered her usual tea, glanced around for an empty seat, and then froze. Across the room, sitting near the window, was Nathan. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it. He looked almost the same. A little older, perhaps, but the calmness in his face was unmistakable. He was flipping through a notebook, unaware of her presence. Emma's first instinct was to leave before he noticed. But then he looked up, and their eyes met. The recognition was instant, followed by that same unspoken warmth that once filled every silence between them. Nathan's expression softened into a small, genuine smile, the kind that felt both new and achingly familiar. He stood and walked toward her. "Emma," he said quietly, almost as if saying her name out loud might break something delicate. She smiled, steadying her breath. "Nathan, I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Neither was I," he replied, a hint of surprise in his tone. "I'm here for a few weeks. Work project. Guess the universe decided we needed another conversation." They both laughed softly, the moment easing into something natural. It felt strange, and yet completely right, to see him again. They sat together near the window, watching the light rain streak the glass. Their conversation started simply. Work, mutual friends, small memories that felt distant yet alive. Each sentence carried the comfort of familiarity, as though time had paused just for them. Nathan stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. "You know, I thought about calling again, but I didn't want to bother you." "You wouldn't have," Emma said gently. "I was actually hoping you would." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, it felt as though they were both standing in two places at once. The present cafe and the memory of an old bridge under falling snowdot as they talked. Emma noticed how time had changed him. There was a steadiness in his voice, a quiet confidence that came from years of living, learning, perhaps even losing. But behind that calm, she still saw traces of the boy she once knew, the one who believed the world paused for snow. When the rain outside slowed to a drizzle, Nathan said softly, "You know that night I called? I didn't plan it, I just couldn't stop thinking about what I left unsaid." Emma tilted her head slightly. "And what was that?" He hesitated, then smiled. A small, thoughtful smile that didn't need words to explain. "Maybe it's better shown than said," he replied, his eyes drifting toward the rain. She didn't press him. She didn't need to. Some emotions didn't belong to words. They lived quietly in the spaces between them. Hours seemed to slip away unnoticed. When they finally stood to leave, Nathan offered to walk her home, just as he used to. The streets were damp, reflecting the city lights in golden fragments. They walked side by side, their steps slow and unhurried. The conversation faded, now and then into gentle silences, the kind that spoke of comfort rather than distance. At one corner, Nathan stopped. "Do you ever think about how life circles back? How some moments wait for us to catch up to them?" Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what this is. A moment that waited." They stood there for a few seconds longer, the night air cool against their faces. It wasn't dramatic or grand. It was simply two people finding a quiet truth, that even after years apart, understanding could still exist without explanation. When they reached her building, Nathan turned to her. "Emma, I still owe you that confession," he said with a soft laugh. "But I think you already know what it is." She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I do." He nodded, his expression gentle. "Then maybe that's enough for tonight." After he left, Emma lingered by the window, watching as his figure disappeared into the soft rain. The world outside shimmered in reflections. Streetlights, puddles, fragments of memory. She felt an ache she couldn't name, not sadness, not longing, but a quiet awareness of something real and rare. In her heart. She knew that what they shared wasn't about rekindled romance or unfinished love. It was something deeper. The recognition of two souls who once understood each other and still, somehow did. The night felt lighter than before, and as the city settled into silence, Emma realized that sometimes the most powerful confessions don't need to be spoken. They are felt, quietly, in the space between two beating hearts that once belonged to the same rhythm. The days after their unexpected meeting passed like soft waves, slow, calm, and full of quiet reflection. Emma found herself walking through life with a kind of peaceful confusion. She went to work, met friends for lunch, carried on with her routines, and yet everything felt slightly rearranged, as if her heart was relearning its rhythm. Nathan had returned to his temporary office across town. They spoke occasionally. A call here, a brief message there, but their conversations were lighter now. The weight of unspoken years had begun to lift, replaced by something gentler, understanding. Still, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something between them remained unfinished. Not in a way that hurt, but in the way of a story waiting for its final page. One Sunday afternoon, the air was unusually clear, crisp and full of the scent of rain that had just passed. Emma decided to walk by the old park on Elm Street, the one she used to visit when she first moved to the city. As she crossed the path lined with maple trees, she noticed someone sitting on the same wooden bench where she often stopped to rest. It was Nathan. He looked up just as she approached, his smile warm but thoughtful. "I was hoping I'd run into you," he said, standing. "Or maybe," she replied softly, "you just knew where to find me." They both sat and for a moment said nothing. The sound of birds and distant laughter filled the air. Emma could feel the familiar calm of his presence, that steady, grounding stillness she had once missed without realizing it. After a while, Nathan spoke. "I've been thinking about that night I called you. About what I wanted to say but didn't." Emma turned slightly toward him. His voice was the same calm, but this time certain. "I never told you," he continued, "that before I left for that job all those years ago, I almost stayed. I had everything packed, ticket in hand. And then I saw you laughing with someone outside the library. You looked happy, and I told myself walking away was the right thing to do." Emma listened, her heart quiet. "And was it?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting both regret and peace. "Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But I've learned that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it's knowing when to let the other person live freely, even if it means not being a part of that life." His words were simple, but they carried years of emotion. Love remembered, choices accepted, peace slowly found. Emma took a deep breath. "I used to wonder if I did something wrong," she admitted. "If I said something, or didn't say enough. But now I think, maybe we both did exactly what we were meant to do." Nathan nodded. Maybe this, us meeting again, was life's way of letting us know we're okay. They shared a small smile, the kind born not from happiness alone, but from closure. Gentle, complete, and kind. The sun began to dip lower, turning the park gold. People passed by, children with balloons, couples walking hand in hand, and Emma found herself quietly grateful for this moment. Nathan reached into his jacket and handed her an envelope. "I wrote this after that first call," he said. "I wasn't sure if I'd give it to you, but I think it belongs to you now." Emma held the envelope but didn't open it right away. "What's in it?" He smiled softly. "Just words I needed to say, even if they never found their way to you." She looked at him, her eyes kind. "Thank you," she said simply. They stood then, the golden light spilling across their faces. The air was still, full of meaning that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Nathan glanced toward the street where his car was parked. "I should go. My project's ending soon. I'll be heading back next week." Emma nodded. "Take care, Nathan." "You too," he said, his voice warm. "And Emma, thank you for picking up that call." He walked away slowly, the sound of his footsteps fading into the soft evening air. That night, Emma sat by her window, the same place where everything had begun. The city lights shimmered quietly outside as she opened the letter. Inside was a single page, handwritten in careful ink. "Emma, there are people who pass through our lives like seasons, brief but beautiful. And then there are those who stay, even when they're far away. You've been both for me. You taught me that kindness can be strong, silence can be full, and love doesn't always ask for a name. If life had been different, maybe we would have shared more years. But I think we were meant to share meaning instead. Thank you for being my quiet miracle." A tear slid down her cheek, not from sadness, but from something softer. Gratitude. Emma folded the letter gently and placed it beside her cup of tea. The rain began to fall again outside, light and soothing. She whispered to herself, "Some truths don't need to change anything. They just remind us we were loved, even if only for a while." As the night deepened, Emma smiled, peaceful, steady, and sure. She didn't need to know what would happen next. Some stories don't end with promises. They end with understanding. And that, she realized, was enough.